Alright y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to part 2 of the tutorial for beginners that are taking up an interest and wanting to learn conventional spin throwing. No, episode 1 was kind of lengthy, but just wanted to make sure I gave you a pretty good plethora of information to get you started, and give you some options as far as targets, knives, and etc. and all that good stuff, along with some good visual examples to get an idea and imagery of movement as far as the posture and stance and a technique for throwing goes. But today, seeing how we got a pretty good portion of stuff out of the way in the first video, we should save a little time on this one. But part 2, we're going to be covering the conventional spin throwing of tomahawks for beginners. And with that being said, I guess let's get right into the next topic of discussion, and that's tomahawks themselves. So let's take a look at some tomahawks, shall we, and have a little discussion on those. Alright, so I got a couple examples of some tomahawks right here. Usually, if you get into throwing, you have two options as far as what kind of hawks you can get. I guess in a sense, technically 3 if you count things like SOG and the zombie killers as a separate category. But just for the sake of time and not getting into that, you usually have your traditional 2-piece hawks, wooden handle with a metal head. A couple examples here. You wouldn't think it by looking at this, but this is a Code Steel spiked tomahawk. It's actually my first tomahawk that I ever got, and I got it as a gift from Pat Minner back in 2011 or 2012, I'd like to say. I've done a montage of this. It's pretty good for recreational fun and play. I guess if you wanted to get these for possible competition purposes, you'd sadly and unfortunately probably had to get rid of the spike off the back to make them tournament legal. Set that down right there for a second. And then right here, we have two, like I said, you wouldn't even think about looking at these just because of the modifications that's been done on them. Code Steel Norse Hawk. It's one that I done a while back. And this right here is a Code Steel Norse Hawk that's been modified by Joe Dura for mountain man use. A lot of the times if you see somebody throwing hawks, majority of the time they'll be your traditional 2-piece hawks. A wooden handle and a metal tomahawk head that fits through the teardrop in the top here. And seeing how all these are modified, I'm going to explain why they're modified right quick. Because usually when you buy Norse Hawks or anything from Code Steel as far as tomahawks go, stock, when you get the handles, when you get on the handles on them are usually 22 inches long in length. And you can throw them like that, but I recommend cutting them down. So let's get into like some suggested overall lengths and handle that you'd probably want to go for. For all intensive recreational purposes, the least minimum amount of length you'd want in an overall handle, and whenever I mean length, overall, just a prime example here, just putting this right here on the, be from this all the way up to here, flush with the top here of the teardrop where the handle fits in. So an overall least minimum length that I would suggest for recreational use, and let's say if you want to get into some mountain man stuff, 10 inches overall in length. Like I said, cutting them down to at least minimum of 10 inches and overall length isn't required. Like I said, you can throw them with the 22-inch long handles, but I recommend you know, cutting them down a little bit. Now let's say if you're wanting to get something for maybe the practicing of conventional spin throwing as far as competition goes, least minimum length that I would suggest is no less than 13 inches overall. And like I said, that would be from the butt of the handle, snug and fit, plush with the teardrop that the handle inserts into. That's just at least a minimum recommendation. I like having 14-inch overall handles, personally myself. But there, I don't really think there's any length, whenever it comes to like overall length, I don't think there's really no set standard and restrictions for how long you can have them. But 14 is what I prefer. If you want to go 15, 16, I think anything over 15 to 16 inches would be overkill, but just for the sake of argument, no less than 13 inches in overall length in the handle. For if you're getting them for purposes of actually practicing for conventional spin throwing for competitions. Now, you'll probably notice something unique about this, and this is a it's an optional modification that you'd want to do to your handles. And I'll explain that whenever we get into hockey English here in a little bit, what that mod is all about. But let's take a look at these. Like I said, when you buy Cold Steel Norsox stock, they're very thick, and the cutting edges are not very thin. And them not being thin, having very thinned out cutting edges and whatnot, can make them kind of hard to stick. So if you happen to have a table sander or an angle grinder or something accessible and available to use, I really recommend that you thin the cutting edges down to where you can actually get a nice good solid hit and stick out of them. And it doesn't hurt to thin the beard of the clip down on the top there at all either. That's what I've done with these. You know, I've thinned the cutting edges out quite a bit. The little bevel there on the top beard of the clip. This makes them a lot easier to stick, and they them being thinned out and not so wide, they will not destroy your targets and absolutely chew them up and devastate them. In all honesty, I could thin this out some more, but it's thinned out good enough to where it will stick. Now, something else I guess I can go ahead and make note of here. When you get things like this, the majority of the time they'll have a hex screw in the back. Highly recommend removing those as soon as possible. Usually when you buy these stock, there will be a nub sticking out of the top. Excess left over from the handle. If you have a table sander or some means of sanding that down, you can tap it down slowly and surely to where it's got a nice snug fit. Whenever you got it plush and you know it's going to be plush and snug and even, you can take something like electrical tape or plumbing tape and wrap it around, then hammer it up and get it good and plush and snug. Or you can take something like a wood glue or some kind of adhesive after you've sanded it down and got it to tapped where it's completely flush and even, to give a secure fit and snug fit on that handle. The whole reason why you take that hex screw out is on bad hits to where like you're coming in way under rotated and hitting like that, it will impact, start causing the head to shift down. That hex screw will leave a huge groove and massive tear out inside that handle, and it will weaken it. A lot of stress and stuff, whatnot, right through here, and the damage due to the hex screw still in there on bad hits and it causing it to shift down off the handle will eventually cause this to break in this general area. So that's why you want to get rid of hex screws as soon as possible. Things like this is a little different because they have a hex screw for the side. I'd still recommend removing them, because you can still remove the head, sand them down, you know, tap it to where it's pretty flush and securely fit to where there's no looseness. You want a nice snug secure fit for sure on the handle whenever it comes to the hawk heads being on the handles. You wouldn't think it, but if they are a tad bit loose, to where they're not securely fastened and fit on there, you can have drops, and it can cause some problems as far as successful sticking goes. So make sure you have snug fits. And I'm going to go ahead and say the obvious thing with two-piece hawks with wooden handles. I do not suggest or recommend that you throw them all into the same target. Just for the sole fact that you don't want to accidentally Robin Hood or split a handle. You know, you guys probably see me doing all these Pt.2 throws and stuff, you know, with two hawks into the same target, and, you know, multiple tomahawk throws. I've been doing this stuff for a while, so I don't really encourage and highly recommend doing that. It's something you'd want to wait till later to possibly try, but if you can, at all possible, avoid throwing them into the same target. If you have one target set up in system, you know, kind of space them out. Don't try to group them together. But it's probably just a lot better if you throw one into an individual target. Now, if you have multiple targets, like 3 to 5 targets, go ahead, you know, put them in each target, do whatever, but just don't try to put them all on the same target. You don't want to split handles or Robin Hood something, or because you'll have to end up buying some replacements. All right, so here we have a few examples of some straight metal hawks. We have a Jeremy Pt.2 Bullseye Blades Chisel Hawk right here. I actually did a little modification and thinned the cutting edge out a little bit on it. It was pretty thin and good to go as is, but does it hurt to make sure you got a pretty good thin cutting edge. Now here we have a Trail Hawk from Flying Steel. Patrick Brewster used to make these. I don't think they're in production anymore, but I'm pretty sure if somebody asked, he might do a special order on some. Now with straight metal one-piece Tomahawks, you can pretty much go to town on the same target, but just like I said, with straight metal knives, they don't have handle scales. Be wary about hitting them into one another and clanging and banging off of one another, because you can create some very bad rough spots and burrs
and it's no big deal, you know. Just have some sandpaper handy, and if by some chance you happen to nick your cutting edge by banging into one, does it hurt to have whetstone or some kind of metal file to touch that up? In all honesty though, I mean, it is safe to throw them into the same target, but just a general rule of thumb for a beginner: if you have multiple targets and you have more than one of a straight metal hawk to your disposal, throw them into separate targets. But they are okay to throw into the same target if you choose to do that. But same thing with straight metal throwing knives. You can do it, but if you happen to clang or bang or hit into a previously stuck hawk, after you go to pull it out, you better inspect it very closely and carefully for burrs and rust spots that could be created. So, okay. So not only do you have this stuff here for in case you happen to nick into another metal hawk or something and you rough up the cutting edge. Doesn't hurt to have these on hand, you know, just to put a little bit of an edge on your hawks before you throw. And go ahead and have all the usual stuff here. Straight metal hawks, you know, if you want to, you can wipe the handles off if they hit the ground. Go ahead and have a notepad and pencil, notebook or pen. You don't even necessarily have to have it stuff. I mean, this being the age of technology and everything, if you do happen to have a cell phone or a smartphone or something that has a notepad app, you know, you can take notes that way. So have a ruler, that way you can find your at least minimum distance away from the target, that way you can write it down. And I think with that, we can just go ahead and discuss posture and stance and forming technique. We won't go too horribly deep into that, because just like with the conventional spin throwing of knives, there's only real three ways you can stand as far as posture and stance and technique goes for conventional spin throwing. So we'll set up an angle for that and briefly just touch upon that, but we're not going to get long-winded with it like we did in the first episode. Alrighty, as far as stance and posture goes for throwing with conventional spin throwing of hawks, if you watch the first episode, it's pretty much going to follow the same guidelines and rules of every posture and stance as far as technique goes that I showed you. If you choose to stick to the traditional, and prime example where I'm a predominant right-handed thrower, I lead with my left, pivot and rock and follow through off my right for bending, for follow through and whatnot. Straight flowing, draw back, pull back, swinging motion and letting it go. And vice versa if you're lefty. You would lead with your right and use your left for pivot and rocking for follow through on the straightforward flowing motion and release. And then you have that non-traditional form and stance, where you'll see people lead with their right and use their left to rock and follow through when they throw. And it would be vice versa if you're lefty. And then we have that the pitching stance, where there would be a wind up, the pitchman style sportsman stance whenever it comes to posture. You'd have a wind up, throw, foot getting kicked off the ground and letting it go straight. And that, of course, also if you're a lefty, you know, vice versa to all that. You know, you would, don't really have, it's self-exclamatory. But, With all that being said, let's talk about the ways you can grip a hawk for conventional spin throwing. I guess in a sense there's three just like there is for knife, but we're going to add a fourth one just for fun. And it's something you can try later on up the road as you advance in your learning experience. But let's get into the grips and techniques for throwing tomahawks. Alright, so as far as conventional spin throwing grip methods, it's like I talked about with knife throwing. You have good old shaking hands. Thumb on the spine hammer grip. You can pinch grip a hawk. Now, something we're going to make mention of here, whenever it comes to different variants of rotation with a hawk, anytime you want to do a variant of a full rotation, the cutting edge needs to be facing towards the target like so. Now, whenever we go to do the second distance, the 1.5 variant, you're going to flip the hawk where the cutting edge is kind of facing back at you like so. And anything that's thrown like that, whether you're shaking hands or thumb on the spine hammer grip or pinch grip, anything that's thrown like that right there will be a variant of 1.5 spin. Now let's talk about a special grip that you can use to do 1.5 variants. And it is throwing from the clip of the beard of the hawk like that. This is something I don't really recommend that you do, but it's just something I am going to throw out there. You can do variants of 1.5 rotation throwing like this. And it's a pinch grip method like that. You can do it like that right there as well, but I don't recommend it. For the sole fact that you can get cut. So the safer method, pinch grip like that. And I'll demonstrate that just for fun, even though it's something I don't recommend you to learn, but just going to put that out there that you can do variants of 1.5 rotation by throwing off the clip of the beard with pinch grip like that. So, shaking hands for full rotation variants and 1.5 variants. Thumb on the spine hammer grip for full variants of rotation. Thumb on the spine for hammer grip 1.5 rotations. And then of course you have pinch grip for both of those. I guess as far as like a point of indexing, whenever it comes to these, I usually like to use the butt end as far as my palm goes for where I want to be gripping. And this is a matter of preference of how you grip a hawk, because I don't think there's really a right or wrong place as far as where you can grip one. You'll find that throwing hawks, regardless of grip and technique, will be a lot easier for you to do successfully than throwing knives. Alright, so all those grips will apply the same as far as straight metal one-piece throwing hawks go, but you get the general idea and gist. Shaking hands, thumb on the spine hammer grip, and then pinch. It's only 3 ways you can really grip it to throw it, as far as conventional spin throwing goes. So I think we're good on that note. We'll get into the next thing, which we're going to discuss hawk English for both variants of rotation. that you want to start out learning. Alright, so before we even start demonstrating any postures and stances and techniques, you know, and all that, we need to talk about hawk English as it applies to one spins. Alright, so we're going to get the obvious one here in the middle. I know we got 3 different tomahawk designs here for examples, but it doesn't matter. This is just to give you an idea. So the spike hawk here in the center, as you can see, pretty straight stick, cutting edge is hitting wedge itself flat in. Handle is vertical, pointing down towards the ground. It's usually the idea perfect stick that you want. Usually if you practice tomahawk and you want to learn it for the purposes of conventional spin throwing competitions go, that's usually what you want to go for. Just for the fact that if you can hit with the cutting edge across as much surface area and face of the target, that gives you a chance to actually possibly get into the higher scoring point rings. Usually idea that you're not too close. It's pretty much about right on the money. We'll just say that. Now the next one up here, as far as one spin goes, this is a clear-cut indication of being too far away from the target, and it probably wouldn't hurt to inch up a little bit if you choose. Now I normally don't really mind if I'm coming in to where I'm hitting horizontal, or the handle is sticking right directly back towards me, or a little downward angled. I don't really stress much about that, but it can hurt you if you're doing that and you're trying to be accurate for the possibility of breaking into higher scoring point rings or chances of actually getting the bullseye if you're throwing conventional spin throwing, you know, one rotation with hawks. It can hurt you and kind of cheat you out of getting some higher scoring point rings getting cut into. But this right here for mountain man throwing, if you choose to eventually partake in some good old mountain man where you throw at playing cards, it's not bad to learn how to be able to over rotate and catch with just the clip. Gives you a really high and better percent chance of getting 3-point center cuts on playing cards. But general rule of thumb is you're a little too far away, over rotating, you're catching top clip of the beard and you're sticking. And if you don't mind sticking them like that, hey, that's fine. You can stay directly where you're at and keep doing what you're doing. But if you're OCD about your sticks and you want to get like that, just move up a little bit and you'll be fine. Now the last one over here, where you can see that the bottom clip of the beard of the hawk is sticking and hanging over the edge of the target face, and the handle is actually touching the backstop. This is a huge, big, fat, disgusting no-no. It's a sign of being way too close as far as distance goes, and you need to back up. And just in case of throw error, a lot of times that's what that modification is there for. In case you come in a little too close and you actually do get the stick, you know, it can give you some leeway room to where your handle won't cause you to bounce out. But in all honesty, too close, back up and get back to that. I do not recommend being satisfied and happy with tomahawk sticks like that. Now, as far as distance goes, let's talk about what it could be as far as throw or error. And a lot of this is pretty similar in nature whenever it comes to grip inconsistencies and you know, bad throwing habits and practices. So right here, you know, not enough handle in your hand, you're choked pretty low down on it. Just choke up, adjust grip if you're trying to go for that. But if you're fine sticking it like that, as far as a grip inconsistency goes, keep doing it. As far as a grip inconsistency goes with that one right there, way too much. Choke down. So it will not rotate slow out of your hand. Alright, as far as throw or error and other bad habits and practices that this stuff can be, lack of follow through, not being committed, possibly a very stiff posture, with very little movement, wrist flicking, drawing back of the arm, not having a straight fluid flowing motion and release. Just cut that out and you won't be doing that. Throw or error, as far as bad habits go, getting a little too loose, rocking forward and falling through way too much, putting your body closer to the target upon release than what it should be. Just tone it down and you should be fine. Recap all that. Okay, distance inconsistencies. If you found your grip, for release minimums that we'll discuss, too far away, just inch up. But it's fine to stick like that. If you're sticking them like that and they're staying and they're not pulling out due to the force impact of them hitting a little over rotated, you can do that. But if you want the more ideal stick for, you know, conventional spin tournament purposes and practicality, you can move up for that. And like I said, that right there, just too close, move back, correct it as soon as possible. Definitely something that you don't, like I said, you don't want to be content and satisfied with sticking your hawks like that. Grip inconsistencies, as far as whatever grip technique you use for handling and throwing it. Not enough of the handle in your hand, choke up. But if you're fine with sticking like that, go for it. Choked up way too high, too much handle in the hand, choke down on your grip placement, and should spin out a little quicker. Bad throwing habits as far as form and posture and release. Lack of commitment and follow through. Flicking the wrist or drawing the elbow back midway upon the throw and release. Like I said, if you're happy with sticking them like that, go for it. But if you're throwing them to get the idea sticks for what you want for conventional tournament scoring, knock all that off and you can get back to that. Bad throwing form and habit as far as posture and technique and stance. Falling through way too much. Just tone it down a bit. Alright, so that's about all we can really discuss as far as hawk English goes for variants of one spin. Now let's talk about how this applies to variants of 1.5. Alright, let's talk about Hawk English as far as it applies to 1.5 variants of rotation. The obvious one in the middle here out of the way first. So just as with the variant of full spin, whenever it comes to your 1.5 variants, if you're coming in like this right here, to where it's sticking and the handle is pretty much on vertical, straight up pointing in the air. If you're going for getting the wide cuts that spread across the face of the target, breaking into the higher scoring point rings, you can stick to that. That's okay. It's actually ideal throw for that kind of throwing as far as sticks goes, if you're learning conventional spin throwing of Hawks just for that reason. This one right here is a indication of being a little too close. Back up a little bit. I don't really mind sticking like that from time to time. Same thing applies with the over rotated one spin. In Mountain Man events, by some chance you're throwing 1.5 Tomahawk at playing cards, and you can manipulate the Hawk to where it comes in, under rotate it like that. Go for it. Give you a chance at some possible 3-point center cuts on some playing cards. This over here, just like under rotated one spin. This is an over rotated 1.5, absolutely disgusting. Fix it as soon as possible. Clear cut sign and indication that you're definitely over rotating and you need to scoot forward. Alright, so recap again. A-OK, distance is right, I guess. And you're learning for all extensive purposes when it comes to conventional spin throwing for the sole purpose of participating in competition. That's an okay stick. Stick to doing that. Too close, but hey, if it's within the least minimum distance away as far as the competition format goes, keep doing it. And as far as Mountain Man goes, I don't think there's really a set least minimum, but I could be wrong. But Mountain Man, that's okay if you're trying to get 3-point center cuts on cards. And for recreational purposes, you know, if you're just throwing for fun, that doesn't matter. You can get away with it if they stick and don't roll their way out of the target. Over rotated garbage, absolutely disgusting. Correct it as soon as possible. Don't be content and satisfied with that. And even with the modification, you're not guaranteed that it's going to save you from banging off the backstop and actually getting the stick. And it's not good to slap across the top of the target and be over it like that anyway, just for the sole fact and purpose that it can create stress, impact, and fractures in your handle over time, and they will break. Alright, so as far as grip inconsistencies, depending on what grip, as far as the handling technique goes for throwing, well, too much of the handle in your hand, choke down. With trial and error, you'll come back to the idea of stick, if that's what you're going for. But if you're satisfied with bringing them in, a little under rotate it, you can keep doing it. As far as the grip inconsistency goes on this, not enough handle in your hand. Choke up on it a little bit, and it should slow the rotation down to where you come back to the more idyllic 1.5 spin stick. Alright, as far as thrower error goes, whenever it comes to this, and this is, of course, if distance is correct and grip index is right. We're just talking about bad habit, practice forming routines. But The over-rotated one could be a lack of commitment and not enough follow-through. Wrist flicking can cause that, drawing the arm back midway upon the throw during the release. Correct all that and you should get back to this. As far as bad habits in form, as far as posture and technique goes, way too much commitment, following and rocking through way too much. Tone it down. But hey, if that's what you're going for, just do whatever floats your boat. But definitely fix things of this nature right here as soon as possible. So I'll repeat it one more time. Distance inconsistencies, as far as least minimums, over rotated, inch up. Too close, back up. Grip inconsistencies. Not enough of the handle in your hand. Choke up. Too much of the handle in your hand, choke down. Bad habit when it comes to form and posture and stance and release. Not enough commitment. Follow through. Wrist flicking. Knock it off. Drawing the elbow back midway through the throw upon release. Just cut all that stuff out and you'll be fine, and you won't ever have to deal with garbage like that. Way too much energy and commitment. Just tone it down a little bit and you should be fine. But hey, if you want to stick one like that, that's okay. Those two right there are really not bad. But that right there is a no-no. I mean, you can get away sometimes with sticking like that and it's perfectly fine, but it's something I urge that if you're doing, correct it as soon as possible. Now, with all that being said, we're actually going to demonstrate some posture and stances from one spin, get a couple of angles and shots, all that, and then we'll go back to 1.5 spin. And then I guess we'll talk about straight metal tomahawks as far as throwing goes after that, because they're kind of unique. But let's get the traditional two pieces out of the way first. Let's get into the first distance finally. Alrighty, so first distance as far as conventional spin throwing of tomahawks go that you want to learn is 1 spin. Now, depending on your build, your anatomy, the length of arm, as far as you know, the final point of release goes and all that. Not everybody's going to throw these from the least minimum distances that I'm going to suggest starting out. But just as a guideline of safety, I'm going to allow some leeway for a least minimum distance to learn 1 spins. And a lot of this will have to do just for the sole fact if you're going with a 10-inch handle, something that's at the least minimum suggested, that'll put you a lot closer to the target. So let's say if you're throwing within the 10 to 13 inch margin as far as overall length of your handle, 10 to 11 feet's a pretty good base guideline to go by. Now, say you got 14 and longer, 12 to 14 is good. I throw using shaking hands at 10 feet. Thumb on the spine, hammer grip, I'll be 13 feet. Pinch grip's pretty much well about the same distance as shaking hands. But just keep in mind that the length
of the handle will make a difference as far as how close you are to complete a successful one spin rotation into the target. So we'll recap that one more time. Shorter links and overall within the range of 10 to 13, safely 10 to 12. Now 14 and higher, 12 to 14 should be fine. And like I said, with shaking hands or pinch, it's going to put me closer. Thumb on the spine will definitely put me a couple of feet back. So for all extensive purposes, I'm just going to be shaking hands whenever I show you these different postures and forms and techniques. But we're going to start out doing the traditional stance. And where I'm a righty, I'm going to lead with my left, pivot and rock, and bend and follow through off my right. And just like in the tutorial with nubs, we'll start with the bottom target and we'll walk our way up to the top target. So let's have at it. Trying to go for idea sticks. Picture perfect ideal sticks that you'd want to go for. And if you happen to over-rotate a one spin, that's fine too. Just don't under-rotate it. Under-rotating, it's bad. Do a couple more throws for a visual example, and then we'll change the angle up a little bit so you can get a better perspective. It's a little weird throwing one that's different, but it's not really a huge detriment. Alright, I think it's a good place to change the angle up at. Those are fairly idyllic sticks to go for. Not too horribly under-rotated. They're all fairly straight. Could inch back just a little, but you get the idea. Alright, so let's change the angle up here. Same thing with as far as posture and stance and approach to the target. Line yourself up to where it's going to be a straightforward follow through and throwing motion and release with no crossing of the body in your throw. yourself centered up and squared on it, have a lot easier time sticking and actually hitting something close to the center mass. And with Tomahawks, well, they're pretty much all top heavy anyway. They don't really require a whole lot of force behind them. And like I said earlier at the start of the video, once you find your distance with Tomahawks, your grip, the amount of force and follow through and all that good stuff, you'll pretty much will stick them successfully all day long. As long as the distance and everything is right, you're good to go. So let's get a point of view and perspective from behind me throwing for a visual, and then we'll move to a couple of visual examples of the non-traditional as far as Tomahawk goes with posture and stance and technique. I think that's a good spot to end on as far as that goes. The idea reason why this is the idyllic stick that you're going for. I actually did make bullseye, barely. But still, had that not touched the bullseye, and there was some scoring rings, I'd undoubtedly been in the 4 if they judged that not a bullseye. So that's why it's idea to learn how to stick them like that, but being over rotated isn't bad either. Just don't under rotate with full spin. Alright, so let's demonstrate the non-traditional stance as far as form and posture goes from a couple angles. One thing about thinning those cutting edges down, they will definitely go in. I'm not even really throwing hard either. To be honest, I've never really thrown tomahawk using non-traditional form and stance and posture, but you know, just for all demonstrational purposes, sitting there playing around with it, it feels very comfortable. Definitely gonna have to spray my targets after this session. Alright, we'll get a behind point of view. I need to check this out right quick though. If you're wondering, no, I'm not hitting all bulls. I'm just throwing. Give you a good visual representation example of each stance as far as form and technique goes. But yeah, let's go ahead and get a behind person point of view here. I'm not gonna lie, I may not have a center target after this. Alright, I think it's a good amount of shots of that. So next, we'll go ahead and demonstrate the sportsman style pitch of throwing from a couple angles, and then we'll talk about 1.5 spin. Alright, now for the sportsman style pitch of throwing. Now, I know I shouldn't have to go. I shouldn't have to say this, but you know, I'm gonna go ahead and recap it. You know, where I'm a predominant right-handed thrower. Whenever I did that traditional form and stance, I led with my left and used my right to pivot and rock and follow through off of. So vice versa, if you're a lefty, switch it up. And whenever it comes to the non-traditional form and stance, if you're a predominant righty, you'll lead with your right and use your left to pivot and rock and follow through off of. And if you're a lefty, that's vice versa. And same rules apply and follow with this. I'm a predominant right-handed thrower, so I'm going to be leading with my right, following through and kicking my foot off the background with my left whenever I go to throw. So let's demonstrate. All this stuff is a matter of personal choice and preference, just experimenting around to see what feels comfortable to you. You feel naturally confident and inclined to do with the best results that you're going for. Good place to stop for a angle change for point of view perspective. So I think it's a pretty good visual example of all those posture and stances whenever it comes to conventional one spin with hock. So I guess the next thing we'll do, we'll go ahead and talk about 1.5 spin. Alright, so let's go ahead and discuss 1.5 spin as far as conventional spin throwing with Tomahawks goes. So, good least minimum base distance to go by to find your distance. Good safe zone as far as feet away from the target, 13 to 16 feet. Reason why I say that, depending on the grip that you have selected, as far as throwing goes, will play a factor in that. Where I like throwing shaking hands from the handle, it puts me a lot closer. So I can throw at 13 feet fairly well shaking hands. And I'll be a little slightly under rotated on a few of my throws. But if I were to put my thumb on the spine of the handle, just like if you were using hammer grip on knife, you will get an increase in distance. I'd be throwing 16 feet at that point, thumb on the spine. So let's go ahead and do a couple of throws here. Traditional form and stance as far as posture and technique goes, and we'll get a couple of point of view angles and whatnot for visual. Alright, so I think that's good as far as this angle goes.
Prime example, being under rotated, not a bad thing. Got kind of the idyllic stick there in the center. And, you know, slightly under rotated on that one, but almost ideal. All three bullseyes. So let's get another angle for a point of view perspective, just for visual. Prime example of being under rotated, not really killing you as long as you're accurate. Idea perfect stick. A little under rotated, but still all good. Alright, so let's demonstrate the untraditional style as far as posture and stance goes with 1.5. Anytime, whenever you're throwing, your hawk heads start getting a little loose, you take the time to tap them back down to a snug, secure, tight fit. Can't stress that enough. Loose tomahawk head will definitely cost you on some successful sticks.
Alright, so I think that's a pretty good demonstration of the non-traditional stance as far as conventional 1.5 spin goes with Tomahawk. We'll do the sportsman style pitch with the 1.5, a couple of different angles, and we'll discuss one-piece metal tomahawks briefly. Alright, let's get another angle just for visual perspective as far as the sportsman style pitch stance goes for throwing. So if y'all are wondering why I'm doing all these different angles as far as the perspective goes, it's so you can get an idea of the movements that you may be making, you know, practicing and experimenting around with different forms and postures as far as it goes for technique. I actually encourage you to record yourself during practice sessions just to get an idea of what you could be doing wrong. You know, if you're having problems determining, you know, it doesn't hurt to actually, you know, play back and just kind of watch to see if you might unconsciously be doing little things that I've talked about. You know, I mean, it doesn't hurt. That's why we're doing all these different angles. I know it's kind of long-winded, you know, including these throws from different shots and angles for, you know, different point of view perspective, but it gives you, it's not a bad thing to do, to be able to spot, you know, mistakes that you might be doing in movement and whatnot whenever it comes to each technique as far as posture and stance and form goes. So let's get a behind the view, point of view perspective shot of this, and we'll just, you know, I said we were probably going to jump into metal hawks. We have one more thing that we need to demonstrate with this, and then we'll get into the straight metal one-piece tomahawks. So I think that's enough as far as that goes. So I'm going to show you that other thing that we talked about as far as 1.5 goes with conventional spin throwing. This is just giving you some options as far as the ways you can throw it. It's something I don't recommend you doing until later on up the road, whenever you mature and advance a little bit in your progression. But let's show you that 1.5 spin with Tomahawk by throwing from the clip of the beard of the cutting edge. Alright, so just for the sake to save a little time, I'm probably going to do like 2 throws tops from each of these angles, just showing you this. But it is possible to do 1.5s by throwing like this. Two throws, and you can see they stuck. 1.5 rotation. And it's just more of a trick throw thing. Like I said, just style points. It's kind of impractical throwing like that, but it is something if you want to learn for fun later. Once you progress and get to where you can actually do things of that nature, you can try it. But starting out as a beginner, I don't suggest it. So let's get one more angle of that, and then we're going to jump into the straight metal Tomahawks and talk about them a little bit. So, like I said, you can throw 1.5, you know, with conventional spin like that, but it's really impractical, and it's just more of a trick shot style kind of thing. Wouldn't see it being very effective in competition. I mean, I am throwing that on the least minimum for O.K.T for 1.5, believe it or not. But it's just something more along the lines as a trick style throw. Not really practical, but you can do 1.5 variance rotation conventionally with a Tomahawk that way. I guess I could show you the sticks here before we talk about the straight metal ones. I have to be getting a new center target block. It's not looking too good, folks. Pretty bad split going on here. But anyway, let me set up an angle, and we'll finish up the video talking about straight metal Tomahawks and some of the unique little qualities about them, and then we'll recap everything that we've discussed and touched upon. Alright, so the reason why I waited to last, you know, to talk about these as far as conventional spin throwing goes, full spin and 1.5 is usually pretty right on top of each other as far as distance away from the target goes. And the fact that they're straight metal, they throw quite similar to a knife, so a good least minimum with these, despite like an inch difference between the two, I can throw both of these no problem full spin at 10 feet. And I mean, I'll just show you here. We're not going to do a bunch of different angles of this just for time saving reasons, but 10 feet full spin with these is no problem whatsoever. Like I said, 1.5 with these. Even though I'm on 10 feet, you know, I can get a 1.5 out of both of them right here, no problem. It'll be an under-rotated 1.5, but it will be a 1.5 spin Tomahawk throw. do that one more time, just to demonstrate what I'm talking about. And it will work the same way with 2 and 2.5. So I'll just throw them open to the same target to show you what I'm talking about here. So first throw will be full spin. Second throw, 1.5. Pretty much right on top of one another. I mean, if you wanted to back up a couple inches to where that would rotate to where the cutting edge is sticking in flat with the handle pointing up vertically, you can, but there's really no increase as distance away from the target as far as conventional spin throwing goes with these. And the little trick throw that I showed you, involving 1.5 from the beard of the clip, you can do it with these two. But I just wanted to touch briefly upon this. No matter what stance, as far as posture and form goes, with technique, you know, a good least minimum with these, 10 feet. And your 1.5 is going to be pretty much right on top of it. And if you want to come back a couple of feet to get that stick to where the handle is vertically straight up pointing in the air, you can. But as you saw, I didn't even have to move back off of the least minimum for a 10-foot full rotation with these. Alright, so with that being said, let's go ahead and recap about everything we talked about. We'll recap on everything that I demonstrated and discussed, and we'll wrap up this video because it's already been a little longer than what I intended. But yeah, let's recap already. Alrighty, let's go ahead and recap about all we talked about and demonstrated. So, as far as tomahawks go, you have, like I said, two options. You can go with a traditional two-piece hawk, like these, wooden handle, inserts into a teardrop of a metal tomahawk head. And you don't want to go with that, you can find a maker that does straight full metal one-piece throwing hawks, such as this chisel hawk of bullseye blades, or this trail hawk from Flying Steel. Now, to be honest, in the long run, if you're getting into learning tomahawks to eventually compete, I recommend you just go ahead and invest in a traditional two-piece hawk. And I highly recommend the Norse hawk from O.K.T Steel. Just because the clip of the beards, once you thin these cutting edges out and add a little bevel on them, they're idea perfect for sticking for both full and 1.5 variants. And the only organization that will allow you to use straight metal one-piece full-tang hawks is O.K.T. And you can throw them from the least minimum of 13 feet for a full spin. I mean, they are O.K.T. friendly and compatible, but just to save yourself a lot of trouble in the long run, just get some of these. Get something that's a traditional two-piece, you know, wooden handle hawk. Now, if you want to get some straight metal tomahawks for recreational play and fun, there's nothing wrong with that. And, you know, a good amount of hawks to have of any design of tomahawk, you know, at least minimum number 3. No more than 4. I mean, I guess 5's okay, but really all you need of any kind of tomahawk is 3 to 4. You know, International Night Throwers Hall of Fame, their competition format is a 3-hawk target system, and O.K.T is a 4-hawk. But if you do decide to go with Norse Hawks from Code Steel, just remember, whenever you get them, they will have 22-inch long handles, so cut them down to a desired length. If you want to experiment before going to the absolute least minimum overall length and handle, cut it down to about 18 inches, at least 18 to 17 inches overall. Play around. If you feel that's too long, trim accordingly and adjust to your feeling and liking and preference. Take the hex screw out of the back, and whenever you get these, like I said, when they're stock bought, there'll be quite a bit of excess sticking up out of here, the teardrop where the hawk inserts, the hawk handle inserts into there. Just tap it off. If you have a table sander, just sand off little bits, and if you have to, hand sand, and tap it down a little bit at a time till it's plush, and whenever you know it's going to be plush and even, tap it back off. Do some kind of electrical tape or plumber's tape, and if you don't want to do that, you can use some kind of wood glue or adhesive. Tap them back on there. Let them dry for a snug and secure fit, because a loose and wobbly tomahawk head on a handle is can be very grieving at times, to say none the less. But you do want to make sure you have a secure, tight, and snug fit for that handle when it's in the teardrop of the hawk head. Don't throw traditional 2-piece tomahawks that have wooden handles into the same target. If all you have is one target, chances are all you really need is just one hawk anyway. But if you want to go ahead and invest in 2 more or 3 more at that point, you're more welcome to do so. Just don't throw them into the same target. Now, if you have more than one target, you have multiple targets, throw them all into separate individual targets. Do not try to put them all into the same target. Now, straight metal tomahawks, you're free and safe to do that. Just be mindful. Same issue with straight metal throwing knives. If you throw them into the same target and you happen to hit and glance into a previously stuck one, when you go up to pull it out, you better inspect it for burrs and rough spots that could be created. That way you don't end up getting splinters or getting nicked and cut open by a bad burr or spot that's been created. Now, as far as like this modification goes on this, I've talked about how that helps deal with under rotated 1 spins and over rotated 1.5s. Now that is an optional mod, and I myself personally don't really recommend it. I mean, this is just my opinion and my advice. It doesn't really affect me so much on my full spins, 2 spins and stuff like that, but it does kind of mess with my 1.5s just a little bit. And the way that I modified mine, I left that mod completely off the butt end. It's just an optional thing. It doesn't matter. Now, if you don't want to go with Norse Hawks, there are a few other things. Like I said, you got a Code Steel spiked hawk here. Good little recreational tomahawk to get, to play around with. Just be mindful, if you do get that and you want to use it for competition, you will have to say bye-bye to the spike. You have frontier hawks, and you also have pipe hawks, and those aren't bad either. There's a few other companies that actually make tomahawks other than Code Steel that are 2-piece with wooden handles. you can look around, ask around, and find some, and they might be actually a little cheaper and won't be too bad to go with. And these are fairly affordable too. These right here might be a little bit more costly, the straight metal one-piece Hawks, but these right here from Code Steel, really not too bad as far as price goes for affordability. And like I said, in the long run, you're probably better off just getting a two-piece traditional Hawk with a wooden handle that inserts into a teardrop for a metal Tomahawk head. So maintenance and whatnot, by some weird chance, let's say that you do happen to splinter or get some rough or bad spots in your wooden handles, and you don't want to get splinters, just have some sandpaper to smooth them back out. That way you're not digging splinters out of your hands and fingers later. By some means, if you happen to get a bad spot created in your cutting edge, or you just want to sharpen them up to make sure you got a nice cutting edge before you throw, whetstone or a metal file, perfectly fine. And if you want to really overkill it, you can smooth your cutting edge out with that. The reason why I have this tape here also, let's just say if you get like a really bad throw or something and you happen to crack a handle, it doesn't hurt to have a little electrical tape handy to tape it up, even though it's not going to really stop the inevitable from happening, but it will keep it together maybe for a little while, and you can get some use out of it till you can get a replacement handle. So, yep, notebook, notepad, pencil, paper, to take notes, find your distances, have a tape measure to measure out those least minimums that I recommended and suggested for finding your distance for each rotation. And something I am going to make mention of with these, especially on hot days where there's humidity and your palms might kind of get sweaty, have some kind of powder, to smooth and slick up your hands. That way you won't have an issue of these trying to stick to your hands, messing up your release. It's also a good thing to do with both straight metal Hawks and knives with scales. Actually, chalk that you'd use to silk your hands up for pull would be a good thing to have on hand. Even baby powder would be a good thing and remedy for that. So it won't hurt to get something like that as well. Now, gave you some least minimum distances to go by. One spin, least minimum, 10 to 13 feet. Shaking hands and that pinch grip will probably put you closer to the 10 feet suggestion. And 13 for the full with thumb on the spine. Like I said, don't fret and worry and freak out if you're not on those least minimum distances away from the target that I suggested. Because not everybody's going to throw it the same. Least minimum distance for 1.5 spin, I think I recommended 13 to 16 feet. And it's the same thing, Shaking hands will put you closer. Pinch grip will undoubtedly put you closer. And thumb on the spine will give you an increase of distance, just like it will if you apply it to a knife. Showed you all the stances and forms as far as technique goes for posture, the way to approach the target. You do have options. Everything that we talked about in episode 1 when covering the basics of conventional spin throwing with knives, you can apply all those stances and forms as far as technique for how you approach the target with Tomahawk as well. I gave you a couple of visual examples with some angles. And like I said there, the whole reason why I'm giving you those angles from different point of view and perspective, is so you can just kind of watch body motion and movement. Because all this is muscle memory reflex training. Repetition with consistency as far as grip, the amount of power and force behind it, getting consistent with the height and the point of release. It's all trial and error and practice. And I will say this, if you do get frustrated with anything, take a breather, take a break, pack up, collect your thoughts. Just breathe, because I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. You wouldn't think it today, but I have had a few frustrating moments recording this tutorial. Not because of thrower error. You know, I have a center block over here that's about probably going to have to be scrapped because of cutter error, lack of thickness. But that's a whole nother story and thing to get into. So yeah, 1.5s, you know, safe distance and a minimum guide base distance to find your rotation, 13 to 16 feet. If you choose shaking hands or pinch grip, it's undoubtedly going to put you closer, and thumb on the spine will definitely put you further away. Now, that little fancy 1.5 that I showed you from throwing off of the clip of the beard here, you know, those can be done from at least minimum of 13 feet. And like I said, really practical. It's just a swaggish trick style kind of throw. I don't see it being effective, even if you took the time to learn to be accurate with it, to apply it to competition. But it would be kind of neat to see somebody do it in a competition and score pretty good with it. But just for swag, just for style and all that. But you can throw them like that, but I don't suggest that you do it. I mean, if you're confident enough to try anything, then you can safely do a 1.5 throwing from the cutting edge of the hawk. More power to you, but just showing you that you can do 1.5 variants of conventional spin throwing that way. Now, as you saw, whenever we demonstrated conventional spin throwing with these, there's not really much of an increase in distance as far as rotation goes. With full and 1.5, they're pretty much right on one top of each other. Might as well be right dead on top of each other, like no joke. And I'm pretty sure if you find your distance for a 2 spin, your 2.5 will be pretty much right on top of it. If not on top of it, just a foot difference. And I believe that has a lot to do with these being straight metal, and they throw quite similar to a knife. I don't really think there's anything else I can talk about as far as all this goes. Just whenever you get these, if you go with a stock O.K.T steel Norse hawker or anything, be sure to cut the excess off. Don't cut it completely down to the least minimum that I said. You know, give yourself some leeway room to experiment to find that perfect length that you like, that feels comfortable to you. If you have a table sander or even a bench grinder, definitely thin these cutting edges down to where you'll have a more effective wedge and sharpened cutting edge to penetrate the stick. Because when you get these stock, they're really thick. I mean, they got some girth to them, and they will destroy your targets quite quickly if you don't thin them out. Remove the hex screw. That way, if you get bad hits, it's not just causing a humongous groove and tear out down through your handle. Just take the hex screw out, remove the head off the handle, hand sand it if you ain't got a table sander to get the excess off. Just do a little at a time, tap it down a little at a time, and knock it back off till you're at that perfect point to where it's plush, and then you can take your electrical tape or plumbing tape, or if you choose to use an adhesive like wood glue or something, then you can do that and let it dry and get your snug fit. And I guess if you want to, but I do not recommend it, you can put the hex screw back in at that point just to ensure that you will have a secure, snug, very tight fit, but not recommended. Optional modification, matter of choice and preference. I myself personally really don't care much for it because it messes me up on 1 1/2s, but it's okay for full variance or rotation. May be different for you, but I think it's about all we can really talk about. I'm trying to make sure that I have covered everything. Yeah, we covered everything. You know, there's nothing really more to talk about. I hope you all have found this tutorial informative and helpful. I guess the next one we'll start covering the basics of unconventional spin throwing. And we'll be doing unconventional spin throwing and knives in part 3 of the tutorial series when we get around to it, because these do take a while to make. But all that being said, appreciate you taking time to watch. And if you are new and a beginner and you've taken up interest in learning the pastime and sport of throwing, whether it be for target sport oriented aspects or just recreational backyard fun and hobby, I hope this video helps you and that you learned something from it. I'm Justin James, the Outlaw Knife Thrower. Y'all have a good one. Peace, and I'll see you in the next video installment later on up the road.